Maxine.
Hi, Megan.
I'm going to be evaluating your spine today from about the back of your head down to your belt line. If I need to expose any scans out here, is that alright?
Yeah, that's fine.
Alright, let me check this tape real quick before you have a seat. Or if I could have you sit right here for me facing that wall.
Sure.
General scan of the pelvis. Our segmental contact point would be the medial aspect of the PSIS with a line of drive pushing lateral to medial as well as posterior to anterior at a 45-degree angle. We're assessing for a springy infill, which is the sudden pushback of pressure into our contact point. I'm feeling a slight restriction here, so I'm going to have you lay down. I'm going to evaluate this a little further. You could face down for me right here. Pull this back a little bit. For the assessment of the ilium when checking for anterior glide, our segmental contact point is going to be just midline of the SI joint and the patient's knee, and the line of drive is pulling the knee anterior to posterior while feeling for the sacrum and ilium to slide past each other. And when checking for posterior glide, our segmental contact point is the joint line of the SI joint and the ASIS. And our line of drive is pulling the ASIS from anterior to posterior, checking for those two slide past each other. After the SI joint, we assess the sacrum. We assessed each axis, which would be the right oblique axis, left oblique axis, and transverse axis. Your segmental contact point for each axis, for the right, it's the left base and the right apex. For your left oblique axis, your segmental contact point is the right base and the left axis, and for your transverse axis, your segmental contact point is the middle of the sacral base and your sacral hiatus. Your line of drive for the right oblique axis would be pushing P to A, assessing for rotation and counter rotation around that axis. Also, you're checking for the resiliency. For the left oblique axis, you're pushing P to A for rotation and counter rotation against or across that left oblique axis. And for the transverse axis, you're also pushing P to A, assessing for nutation and counter nutation while checking for resiliency. After the sacrum, we check the LSJ, which for lateral bending aspect, our segmental contact point is your L5-S1 segment, as well as the patient's knee. Our line of drive is pulling the knee from medial to lateral and feeling for the joints to move past each other, and checking for infeel while springing into that L5-S1 segment laterally after bringing the joint to tension. And then for rotation, our segmental contact point is the L5-S1 segment and the patient's ASIS. And our line of drive is pulling the ASIS anterior to posterior as well as lateral to medial, feeling for those joints to separate. And once we pull the joint to tension, springing into that L5-S1 segment from lateral to medial, feeling for that infill.
You sit up for me, face this wall again. Continue with my stare. Found a little bit of a restriction right here. I'm going to evaluate that a little further. If you could have you put your hand right behind your back for me real quick. Alright. Thank you. And if I could have you cross your arms for me. Alright, flex forward. Extend back from you. One more time. This way. That's what we start.
After the scan of the pelvis, we moved along with our general scan up the spine. Our segmental contact point is the midline of the spine, and your line of drive is P to A as you move inferior to superior up the spine, assessing each joint for resiliency. We found a little restriction around T6, T7, so we further evaluated that segment and we checked for flexion extension, while our segmental contact point being the midline of the spine in between the T6, T7 spinous process, while bending the patient posterior to anterior as well as anterior to posterior, feeling for those spinous processes to separate. After that, we checked for lateral bending, with our segmental contact point being the lateral aspect of the spinous process, pushing lateral to medial and pulling the patient slightly superior to inferior to feel the separation between those spinuses. And then for rotation, our segmental contact point again is the lateral aspect of the spinous process, and pulling the patient right and left once getting the joint to tension, pushing lateral to medial to assess that joint plane infield.
You're not taking, we want to go out.
Cross your arms for me, please.
Yeah. I was like, where are you pointing at?
Cool.
while at the T6, T7 segment, we found an issue with the ribs, so we did a full evaluation of both T6, T7 ribs, and our segmental contact point is the intercostal space between T6, T7 rib, and our line of drive when checking elevation is inferior to superior, and when checking for depression, our line of drive is superior to inferior, pushing on the superior aspect of T7 rib or T6 rib. Check your cervicals, Rick. Relaxing my hand. Check it out.
Okay, if you could, stand right here for me. Put your feet as close together as you can without touching. You close your eyes for me and just move your head up and down and just stop whenever you feel in a neutral position. Alright, thank you very much. That's going to be it from you today.
And then we moved along with our scan up to the cervicals, with our segmental contact point being the articular pillars, our line of drive being posterior to anterior, slightly inferior to superior on the upper cervicals, assessing both joint play as well as infield. And we reached the atlas, we did a full evaluation of the atlas. For translation, our segmental contact point is the TVPs of the atlas, pushing lateral to medial, feeling for the translation of the atlas. And then we check for rotation, with our segmental contact point being the posterior aspect of the TVP, pushing P to A as we turn the patient's head right and left. And then to check whether the atlas was elevated or depressed, we had the patient stand up, close their eyes, nod their head, and then assume a neutral position and check to see whether the nose was pointed up, down, or right in the middle.